Hey everybody, welcome back to The Harder Shaft, and season 2 is on its way, and today we've got the lovely Lisa who's going to be talking to us about some of the sort of impartial and also indirect ways that we actually make other people feel uncomfortable, especially when we think about male-female or two gay guys or two lesbian girls, and how, or even trans, and how we create these sort of assumptions about them. Lisa, how are you?
Oh, good morning. I'm really well. How are you?
I'm good. And like, I've been looking forward to this subject because it's something that I think, to be honest, I've always had this concept when I was watching Sex and the City, right? And I think, okay, these four girls, they're out of the town, they're living in New York, and they're just living the best life. And there was no sort of judgment in a way that was direct with the group. And then you come into the real world, and then judgments and sort of pigeonholing people comes in. So let's start off with what you think. What do you think is the reason why we have a need or a desire to do that to people?
Oh, it just goes back to, I think, on a whole, society is so judgmental. Like it's
Especially now, isn't it?
Yeah,
now
it overwhelms me, Joey, how how critical and how judgmental people are. On the weekend, I had a friend down staying the weekend with me, and we binged all of Lizzo's Watch Out for the Big Girls. I don't know if you've seen that reality show. Yeah, and it was just it's so wonderful and empowering, and you just hear everybody's stories, and all of them talk about the judgment and the criticism and how they grew up as overweight children, adolescents, feeling suicidal, like the bullying, everything, and how much meaning it had to be on a show like that, where you could be your true authentic self as a larger person. And I can relate to that as a larger person, and just watching that going, oh, this is amazing. Why are we so judgmental, and why do we have these double standards, which have existed since the dawn of time, let's face it,
Yes.
But probably more so in this age of social media, I think.
Yeah. Do you think, because that's interesting that you say that about the Lizzo show, because again, part of me thinks sometimes, is there a tokenism that's going on, right? Like to make, you know how everyone's talking about diversity and all that? Because I just heard, I just read yesterday that they're actually producing the very first gay romantic love series, like The Bachelor, but it's all gay. And I thought to myself, no, that's been done before. And then I realised, no, what has happened is that they've used the gayness as a token, and it hasn't really been gay. It's been like, spot who the gay guy is, or let's throw in a trans woman and pretend that she's a woman. So how do you feel about that? Do you think that we are entering an era where it's now real, or do you think that we're still basing it on tokenism?
No, I don't think it's tokenism. No,
Okay.
I think it has been. Yeah, I think you're correct. But I think we're seeing much more representation of diversity that is inclusive rather than tokenism now.
Yeah. Well, I guess the thing that I guess maybe you can help me understand is that when you watch like the reboot of Queer as Folk, I don't know if you saw that, right?
No.
I found that to be overwhelming because it went from, white guys, right? And it's been redone twice. And then all of a sudden it's now the diverse version. And the diverse version was it was intense. Now is that me just expecting it just to be, sprinkled with more white guys, you think? You know what I mean?
Yeah. How did you find it intense? In what way?
Well, I guess because I didn't identify with any of the characters, because I don't live in a ghetto or an area where I see that, right? I see it on television. I don't necessarily go for Troy much. So for me, I just, I guess it's just something I need to catch up on, because every character in that show seemed to be really comfortable with their sexuality. Right. Which I personally found a little bit not real. Like, especially the younger, I don't know, you know what I mean? It's like, I wasn't judging anyone. It was more, it was just interesting how I think it owned it, and I was the one that was uncomfortable. So I know it wasn't the show's fault.
No. And I'm wondering too whether there was, did you feel that there was maybe I wish it was like that when I was younger kind of vibe?
No, I felt that there was a part in the middle missing.
Right.
Which was the bridge between the old days privileged white men in every show to now all of a sudden there. So I found when I watched the reboot of Tales of the City, that was a lot more easier to actually see the arc. Right, because there was a trans bar, but there was also the sprinkling of... Did you watch that one?
No, I haven't seen the reboot of that.
With the white, Marianne being the really uptight. So there was a nice arc there, and the way that she went from uptight to acceptance, right? But with the Queer as Folk one, I found it hard, and it's interesting because it didn't get a second season.
Right.
Even with the L Word, I don't know if you've seen that reboot. That's got a beautiful arc. So. Sometimes the arc helps explain these labels that we have versus, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah. Yep, I think so sometimes. And I've been hearing a lot, I haven't seen it yet, about the reboot of Heartbreak High.
Yes.
Yeah, with incredible diversity, represented. Yes. And I sort of wondered too about that, what might be people's experiences of seeing that, thinking,
that was really popular.
I wish my high school, wish it was like that for me growing up, where I can be, trans or bi, non-binary, and it's and not copping slack, or whatever. And I've got a couple of friends whose 15-year-old children came out as bi. Thought, gee, no way would that happen when I was growing up. Not a hope. I grew up in the 80s, and I just thought, wow. We
had unfortunately. We wanted to, because we're both similar age, and we both wanted to sort of come out, but we also had the HIV thing that was happening at the same time, which I think. Because I experienced a lot of sexuality at high school. I was actually quite happy, but that was all pre that public thing. Going back to school, though, do you think that there is the division between the popular kids who become the bullies, right, versus the people that are different that end up being bullied? So then there's this perception. Again, I know it's a very Americanized thing, but
I was thinking that.
I mean, were you bullied at school?
Not at all. No, I never was. But I was. I think, growing up, when you grow up as an overweight kid. Well, for me anyway, and I think for other sort of fat kids might say the same, you kind of might be that introvert or you might be the extrovert. So you become the class clown and everybody's friend, which I was, and no one ever said anything, against me because I was very super friendly. And, how much of that was really conscious or how much of that was just my personality or how much was as putting on an armor so you don't get bullied for being fat, right?
Yeah, that's that's probably a good word, because I was skinny, so I had the opposite experience, and so I was short and skinny, and I was bullied until year sort of 8, at the end of year 8, where I started to grow, which I still haven't grown that much, but it sort of changed, and it's interesting because I never thought of it as armor. I just thought that I became more liked, but in reality, I think I just learned how to play the game.
Yeah, I think you're right. We do. We start to become more observant. And then I guess if you throw in any elements of sexuality on that, and you think, well, what do I, how much of that mask do we wear to hide our sexuality? And sort of coming back to one of these double standards that exist. It's okay to look a certain way, but not to, feel sexual desire for someone. Where do the standards exist around that? Yeah.
Did you go to a all-girls school or a mixed school?
No, unisex. Yeah.
So I guess I'll start off with the guys. Like, I went to an all-boys school, and it was all about proving that you had sexual power, right? And in reality, looking back, I don't think anyone was having sex, right? I mean, I was, but I couldn't say anything because I was having gay sex. But everything about that was all based around you're empowered, and they pat you on the back if you're doing it. And if you didn't do that or you felt uncomfortable, then that's where again you got pigeonholed as being either they called you gay or they called you a virgin or whatever. How did it work out for girls? What's the girl perspective of that? Did girls support each other through that period?
I think back in the 80s, we were probably more later bloomers, So. There probably wasn't many girls that I knew of, not in my sort of the group that I was hanging with, that were having sex. there was, there was a group of the kind of the tough girls. I wasn't one of the tough girls. The tough girls were having sex, but I wasn't really in with that group.
But was it accepted? Like, or did you call them names? Did you? You know what I mean? Like, guys would say stud. So, oh my God, you've had sex. And I know this from hearing from my sister that they, there was this, even if you just looked at a guy, then they'd call you these like slut and all that shaming stuff. So I'm just wondering if, you experienced it or of why that happens.
I wouldn't have experienced that, and I didn't see much of that. But absolutely at that time though, big time it was. Yeah, guys having sex, like all the surfer boys. I'm sure they were all having sex. I was
just going to say that Puberty Blues. Yeah. Puberty Blues was one of those movies that where that girl ends up being like the bike. They called it a town bike.
Town bike.
And that is the thing that I feel uncomfortable with as a man hearing. And so when you hear other guys using that language, and it seems like disposable, or it seems like it's disassociated. And the curious thing about me talking about Sex in the City is, I am curious to know why women are the ones that sometimes point the finger at other women, and they use that pigeonholing as well.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, you think I would have thought there would have been a unity versus.
But it's how we're socialised too, and I think it's also about our backgrounds. So, depending how we're raised, and the maybe some of the faith beliefs, and if you look now, for many people, the sort of societal shame around sex before marriage. So that's not really something for many of us that even applies anymore. Go back to my mother's era, and she was. 60 years ago got married. So sex before marriage, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, like shameful, right? Really shameful. And then throw in a pregnancy on top of it. Well, that was just, that was just it.
I'm sure there's still some cultural groups now that do that. But you're right, like, because my nephew and niece, they're both living with their partners. And I look at them every time and go, oh my God, like that would never have cut it. So I know there's been a shift, but do you still think that underneath there is some still people, that there is some judgment still? Like, for example, I'll give you an example, right? I feel that, I agree totally with you, but I feel that now it's all based on circumstance. So say if someone gets attacked, right? Then some people, not everyone, but some people would then look at the girl, and it's like an automatic pilot that goes, and goes, okay, so she wore that outfit, right? Versus going, okay, let's hear what happened. And that's the thing that I again feel uncomfortable. It's an instant assumption about that, girls shouldn't be being out by themselves, or, she was walking home through a park. I mean, I feel that she's allowed to do that.
Of course. Yeah. And I think that standard also applies, judgment. Say we're talking about, say, a gay man who might be attacked, who met someone online. And didn't know anything about them, and went to their place or have someone over their place for a hookup, right? And again, there'll be judgments about that, but people will make judgments about that, right? So,
well, can we change the equation where there's a lot more judgment? Is a gay man goes to a park and meets someone and gets beaten up, right? Yeah. Because it's taken a long time for even the police to not judge, right? Because. Yeah. Culturally, people don't go to a park and have sex, but it's all of that. I mean, like, I did see a documentary recently about how in the 80s and the 90s, like, it was something about how Sydney men were having sex on the at the park near the cliffs.
Yes, that's right.
And so many people were pushed off those cliffs, right? And those cold cases are still not solved, and the police have stopped. So again, it's just about what they judge, and isn't it?
Well, someone was found guilty just recently of one of those murders, which was fascinating. Yeah.
How come now?
Well, new evidence. So, which I think was someone who knew and dobbed someone in. So, but that's like a historical, 20-year murder or something. So, so finally, that family's been able to put their.
Maybe that was because 60 Minutes actually did a really intense report recently. So maybe that was a link. But what was found was, which really irked me, is a lot of those people that were doing it were policemen. There was like an underground in Sydney. In Sydney, there was this sort of culture of the policemen going to do that. So
Yeah.
You know, this is interesting. Like, what do you think was the cultural shift? Like, how did we start changing about, you know, do you think it's just more about awareness and people getting caught out, like all the corruption and all the labeling and stuff like that?
I think it's a combination of things, and I think to push back from the queer community. I mean, if you go back and look at the 78ers who first marched down Oxford Street, you know, in protest, and what that's become today, you know, Mardi Gras with hundreds of thousands of live televised events, you couldn't have guessed back in 1978 where all those people were arrested just for you know, advocating for their queer rights, to what it could become today. So I think that's a really good example how you can actually look back over, say, 4 decades or whatever, and see progress. And so cultural attitudes shift, like the sex before marriage. We have marriage equality. There was a time when that, you know, even just being with, you know, like homosexuality was illegal. When you think back on how long ago that was, not that long really. So,
no, I mean, I was out when it was illegal.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing.
And also, I think advertisers coming to the party, like again, changing the perception. What about, you know, that's really good how you can, that's true, you can highlight a timeline, but what about for women? Like, do you feel that that timeline is a little bit less visible, like in regards to equality, in regards to, you know, respect, in regards to consent, all those things that we've talked about in the past? Like, do you feel like the timeline is leading us somewhere as a woman?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think I like to think of you know, gay rights as encompassing everybody, right? You know, so I mean, look at the Dykes on Bikes who lead Mardi Gras and have for years. Their presence.
I'm secretly
strong.
scared of them. I'm still scared of them in a good way.
It's wonderful power. It's the wonderful power of the solidarity, and I think the meaning of that too, where women lead the Mardi Gras parade. I think that sends such a wonderful, strong, powerful message. And that, I think things have come a really long way. I mean, there's
And what about generally though? Generally, like for women, like, do you think that the timeline for women it's changing?
I do think there's change. I do think there's. I think women are more able to call out slut shaming. I mean, slut shaming's been around forever and probably will continue to be. But I think people are more. Women are more owning their sexuality, owning their sexual expression. Are able to stand up for themselves and push back on that slut shaming, and call out the double standards and say, why is it okay for you and it's not okay for me to enjoy casual sex or multiple partners and express my sexuality how I want to.
And that also the revolution of, you know, toys and women being comfortable talking about vibrators and how it's now a multi-billion-dollar industry. And then I think the other thing that you mentioned about our parents is, I think there was an idea where men wanted to marry the good girl and have sex with the bad girl, right? But I think now that that's blurred in together because, like you said, sex before marriage has changed. So there had to be a bit of a shift where men accepted the fact that their partner has had sex with someone else.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
absolutely.
Like, you know, that whole virginity thing that was around.
Yeah. And we sort of we try not to talk about virginity these days, but they talk about the age of sexual debut, because virginity has a very patriarchal overlay on top of it.
This is what I love about you. You always teach me something new. Say that again. The age of
sexual debut. What's the first age of your sexual debut? Because virginity has this very, it does. It's all about the power dynamic. We won't talk often about, when did you lose your virginity? Like it's something that you lose rather than, hey, I'm gaining this sexual experience, right?
Yeah.
But also, in some cultures, like it's so important. And if you don't bleed on those marital sheets on the first time you have sex, you must have had sex with someone else and you're a slut, you know. So there's very huge implications around that. But we're thankfully not using that kind of language anymore.
Yeah.
It removes that element of that sort of patriarchal overlay and power around that. And it was like, when did you first start having sex?
Yeah.
You know?
But it's interesting. It's interesting that you call it debut, because in my mind, when as soon as you said that, I thought about proms in America and how that's one of the biggest days or nights that a lot of people use their Say that word that again because I can remember. It's called
debut.
Yeah, but the whole
Sexual
thing.
debut, the age of sexual debut. That's what the researchers like to. The researchers like.
I really
to
do
talk
love
about.
that. Yeah.
I don't use the term. I would say to a client, when did you start first having sex?
Yeah.
And that can be a very loaded question, right? Because someone might say, well, I was sexually abused as a child. And then that's a whole other conversation around, well, that's sexual violence, and that's like, not sexual debut and sexual abuse. When did you choose to have sexual intimacy with someone? When
that's
did you
really
start
good.
becoming sexually intimate? That's a question I like to ask.
Do you think, as a sex therapist, do you think that is happening because we are now realizing that more people were sexually abused?
I think,
you know what I mean? Like, think before we used to. I think a lot of people kept it a secret, but because again, as a therapist myself, I never really realized. You've taught me something. Like, when you say that question, it's loaded because it isn't their choice. So that's do you think that's we are becoming more open to talking about it?
Yeah, I think so, and also being able to understand that that is not sex. So that is a sexual activity that happened to you without your consent, but that's not sexual pleasure and that's not sexual intimacy. And there's a very strong difference between that. So I'm very careful in how I word that. But I think there's more understanding of the nuance of how we ask people things.
Yes.
You would know that as a therapist yourself, I think.
Yeah, and it's really, but it is interesting because the trauma about being, sexually abused versus the debut is so there's no trauma with the debut. It's empowering and it's enjoying and and all those things. So
hopefully, not always. In terms of talking to people about their, the first sexual experiences that people have. Are quite often terrible, right?
Yeah.
Because we often don't.
But they're still, most people still feel like it's their choice versus.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you feel that, like, the label part of that is? Are you noticing that younger people are not interested in the labels, or do you think that there's more labels now than there ever have been?
Oh, there's more labels in different ways. There's more terminology now for things that have always.
I feel like everything's got a label now.
Everything's got a name. So if you think back in the day before phones, when we were growing up, if you didn't want to talk to someone, you gave them the cold shoulder. You just stopped talking to them. Now it's called ghosting.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we've got all this. There's breadcrumbing. There's all these different gaslighting. There's all these things that have happened.
But
now they've actually just got different names. And gaslighting has just become so popular in our language now. It's something that's always happened, and based on the film Gaslight, the Alfred Hitchcock film from way back when. So it's the concept is really old. But we've just really embraced it. Catfishing, all these terminology.
Again, it's there. I guess you're right. But what about? Do you think there's a copycat element to it? Like, do you think more people are doing it because they don't know about it, or do you think that we've always done it?
I think that social media has created more opportunities for things that. So we had to ghost in person. we just stopped talking to people. But so I think that with that, there's creates a whole other genre, isn't it? And like catfishing, for example. But I guess catfishing is that, that you think about that online, making up stuff.
Well, catfishing was like sort of in a way in our time was when you used to put an ad in the paper and you'd say handsome person wanting to meet someone and then you'd show up and it's like, it's all of that sort of, you're right, it's always been around.
Yeah, misrepresentation is what we're talking about. Yeah.
And I guess with ghosting, I remember when I was like, I had a fight with my friends at school and they would walk past me and not talk to me. So that's ghosting, isn't it?
Ghosting. Yeah.
And it would really irk me. But before we finish, I did want to bring up one little thing. I just wanted to bring up Andrew Tate. Just what your view on how he was sort of cancelled and all that, based around his view of women and based on some of his statements about ownership and all that with women, and how some men are still seeing him as a hero, right? So again, I don't want to get into a deep debate about it, but more an opinion on, do you think that it's a good thing that we get, we cancel those sort of people, the people that have these voices that influence a lot of men, for example, to see the world through coloured, blurred? Because, he's got his religious context, which is his religion says that a woman is his own part, he owns its property, right?
Shadow, yeah.
Yeah, and the way he speaks about stuff, it's sort of the way he defends it. It's sort of like he has a good reason, but I don't believe that the defense of it is actually the truth. I think that it's just a way to sort of move everything around so he doesn't get in trouble. What's your view on, not him particularly, but your view on people that do that, sort of commentators?
Yeah. There are so many people, I think, who are just wrapped up in their own self-importance and narcissism, and they seem to get the platform by which to get these views out there.
Millions of followers.
Millions. Absolutely. And and it's interesting, again, with sort of cancel culture, where there's so much power now in the social media, isn't there? So much power. I guess for us, we would just vote with our feet, turn off the TVs, all that sort of stuff. But now, it's interesting around what's happened to. Are you able to have debate? Are you able to talk about stuff? When does it become impossible? Comedians are really interesting, talking to, when you hear comedians talk about what topics can you talk about and can't you talk about, and what's acceptable and what's not. And
well, could I just interject there? Just now, because it's happening right now, we're on the border of Kyle Sanderland being cancelled, right? Yeah. But there's a debate going on because people know that he brings millions of dollars to the radio station because, is what he's doing on purpose or is what he's doing, planned, right? Yeah. But in reality, he just recently slurred all this stuff about disabled people, right? So, I think that cancel culture can happen overnight. You could be cancelled overnight. But I do think that you're right. If we're not talking about it properly, I think that someone's career or someone's life could be totally destroyed.
Yeah, I think it's a very tricky area, isn't it? I think ethicists would have a lot to say about this topic, and it is. I find it really interesting. And it's about, do we have the right to our opinion? But do we have the right to be protected from the opinions of others? Go right back to the start of this conversation about double standards and bullying and harassment of the queer community, and all the bullying and dramas that have been dumped on people over the years because of other people's entitlement to their opinion, right? So I don't think you're a queer person. I don't think you deserve to live. I'm going to push you off this cliff. I mean, come on.
See, that thing to me, even though we keep referring back to our day, I don't really remember. I mean, I don't think it was ever that intense. Or was it? Like this whole ability to say someone is, look at that picture behind you, for example. Say you're trying to sell that picture and someone says to you, I'm going to kill you. I don't understand what the link between the picture and killing you has got. So that's, people now have gone like 50 steps ahead and they're like really showing their hatred over not liking your picture.
And I wonder how much of that is entitlement. How much is that, if you go back and just maybe look at the progression of just our emotional development over the years, maybe just say 20, 30 years or something. And you look at what's acceptable now that wasn't decades ago. And a good example of that, I think, is men having more permission to express themselves emotionally, to be vulnerable, to share time with other men, like in the men's shed or things like that. The importance of, getting out of that boys don't cry mentality to more acceptance. If you look at the suicide rate, we've talked about that, disproportionately higher in men, right? So,
and you do realise they're still not doing it. They're still not taught, But but the entitlement is, I think, that white privilege is always going to be there because. Even behind the bullying, you've got some of those people bullying are paid, for example, right? And the people that are paying them are white men. So there's still this whole ability to manipulate trauma and to manipulate pigeonholing for profit, because we all know, right? As much as I don't like it, people prefer bad news versus good news.
Yeah.
Right. So if someone says, "Oh, look at Lisa, she just did a beautiful painting," and that story's great, but people move on. But oh my God, Lisa was bullied online and she was told all that's, you know. So I think that that's sort of amplifying the work that we do to try and get rid of pigeonholing and getting rid of the double standards. There's sort of like this treadmill that we're on. What do you think? Do you think that we are?
Yeah. I like to think it's changing. I'm probably an eternal optimist, but
that's why I love
you. I certainly try to really providing sort of sexual psychoeducation to clients and young women in particular about how to tap into sexual pleasure, and members of the queer community. To how to really advocate for yourself, so you can push up against those double standards. You can ask for what you want. Some of the double standards exist around things like how many sexual partners do you have? Have you had? When did you start first having sex? Who can initiate? Who tops and bottoms? You know, there's so many double standards that exist, isn't there? Just within the sexual arena. You know, I like to be able to work with people to help them tap into that ability to say, to ask what you want for, you know, that it's okay sexually to ask for what you want for.
And to say no.
Yeah, to say no, and to for people to have that permission, to feel you've got your permission to push back against these double standards that might be getting in the way of you experiencing sexual pleasure, how you really want to experience.
Yeah. Is there anything that you want to refer the listeners to? Like, is there any books or any things that you feel is a good way to learn a bit more about this? Do you have anything that you've read yourself or anything that you can think of? And if you don't, I know I put you on the spot, so sorry.
No, look, there's a really interesting. I'll read you the name of it because it's a great study. Because you sent me a link to the study to have a talk about this topic. But there's a great study you'll find interesting. And it's called Butch Tops and Femme Bottoms: Sexual Positioning, Sexual Decision Making, and Gender Roles Around Young Gay Men. And it's so interesting, just listening to young gay men's perceptions of these double standards around what does it mean to be a top, what does it mean to be a bottom, it's a qualitative study, so it's got all these direct quotes from participants in it, and it gives you some real insight into, just for gay men, the standards, the double standards that exist around and the assumptions that are around. How do you look, and what's the assumed position that you might take based on your appearance? So assumptions everywhere, right? So that's
I still feel that from what you're saying, I still feel like there's a very strong directive through the porn industry, because like at the moment, for example, the big trend is this whole daddy son thing. But let's use that as an example, right? So you don't have, you know, when you look at those ads or those clips, you never have the dad being fucked by the son. Right, so it's just an automatic thing where this young boy is the bottom, so it's putting that perception, and I can't believe how quickly that became entrenched in the gay world. Right, so I guess that's what you're meaning, but then in the bedroom the daddy likes it, but so it's not being represented. So it is interesting how
it's fascinating stuff. So
and I've got a client at the moment. I've got a client at the moment who's a straight guy who's married, and he's finding it hard to come to terms with the fact that he likes toys. Right, and the shame that goes with it, because this is his third marriage, and this wife doesn't like it. And so again, when you think about it, there really isn't a very big, vast advertising, dialogue around straight men buying dildos. There is, but it's not very much in our faces, It's
becoming more popular. There was a show called Broad Street, and it's a comedy show, and a woman on that pegged, got a strap on and pegged her boyfriend with the strap on.
Broad City,
that's it. Yeah, that's it, Broad City.
Oh my God, Alana's crazy.
And sales of strap-ons went through the roof after that episode.
Well, I bought one for that show too.
Yeah. It was like that portrayal was so unusual in a mainstream media, and
it's popular though, isn't it? But we just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
You must hear so many things.
I do. I do.
So I guess you know that it's not as, it's hidden in the real world, but really there's an undercurrent of learning and acceptance that's going on, which is good.
Absolutely. And it's about understanding how your body works, because many of us don't understand that. Just in terms of where the pleasure areas are in your body, like the prostate, for example, and taking out some association that any sex act is gender based, so you can actually say, yeah, you've got a butt, you can put stuff in there no matter who you are, and you can enjoy it. There are ways to enjoy that. So shifting out of those ideas, oh, that's a gay thing, or that's a whatever, taking out those double standards and those judgments, again, all about the judgments. Get rid of these judgments and just start to enjoy ourselves, our bodies, our sexual pleasure, our intimacy, in whatever way that you want to experience it.
Yeah, I could talk to you forever. And I think, what I would like, with your permission, is maybe to extend this conversation. The next time we talk is that maybe we explore the evolution of swinging and open relationships and all those sort of things, where it sort of leads into this thing where, I love the fact that there are pioneers out there that have the bravery to be spoken, when people don't speak about it, that actually help the rest of us to sort of go, yep. So is that okay if we talk about that next time?
Absolutely. We need to normalise these discussions.
Yeah, I mean, and I've learned 3 amazing things today, so thank you for that.
Excellent. Always a pleasure. Yeah.
Till next time. All right, everybody, thanks for listening to The Harder Shaft. Now, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and also go across to our website and look at all the great content there. Until next time, keep playing with your shaft. Bye.